without further ado, we want to welcome our guest tonight, Winston Peters, to Straight Talk. Winston, thank you so much for your time in such a busy election campaign season. And I don't want to waste the time that we have with you. So we're going to get straight into the questions, if that's okay with you. And Bruce Logan, you drew the short straw and you're got the first question.
Winston, you've reached the dizzy heights of everyone. If the word Winston comes up, everyone knows who they're talking about. So you must be one of the most experienced politicians in New Zealand. So thinking about that, what do you think is the most important issue facing us right now?
Well, first of all, good evening to you and your viewers. Can I just say this, that we've got all these major concerns, beginning with the massive cost of living crisis we have, where 30% are seriously hard up against it. And another 40% say they can make do, but it'll be very hard for them as well. And then perhaps the next big concern is the level of crime, gang behavior, and illegal drugs. And then, of course, something that is always something present in a society like ours, or any society really, but a society like ours, and it's a concern for our health system and how well it's doing. Now, all those things and multiplicity of other matters we can address, but we will not successfully address them. We'll not successfully address them until we have first understood that the democracy that we live in, and has been there since 1854, Maori got the vote in 1867, and women, much far too late, got in 1893. But we're a comprehensive democracy where in recent years that democracy has been corroded by what is clearly a plan, far more sinister than most people and your viewers will understand, in my view, not because I'm arrogant, but because it comes with a naked purpose, and that is to corrode our democracy and its introduction of separatism and what is clearly apartheid. And they'll do their best to try and say that's racist talk, but it's not. It's there as clear as daylight. And we'll not fix anything up in the next 3 years or beyond unless we fix our democracy up and restore one person, one vote of equal value. Now, a lot of people out there making all sorts of statements, but they are compromising with those statements that I've just made, attempting to adapt to those statements I've just made. And also they've got the DNA in the establishment of what I'm talking about all over it. Beginning with the UNDRIP, which we declined to sign up to in 2007, when I was the Foreign Minister. It was the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. And then it was signed up to by the National Party and the other parties at the time, ACT and the Maori Party. In this dead of night, no one got information about this. Then if you go back, you will look at the establishment of the Auckland Super City. And when they did, this super city was established in circumstances where they had an unelected Maori board, not including all the Maori, but just Ngāti Whātua locally. The mass majority of Maori were left out, if that had any principal excuse at all. And then the other last one was having fixed up in 2004 the foreshore and seabed debacle that was arising from a Maori land court case in the Marlborough Sounds. They repealed our legislation and brought in MACA, or the Marine and Coastal Areas legislation, which now sees over 600 claims before the courts, mainly with Maori fighting Maori, where the taxpayer is required to fund those claims at $300,000 a claim. But anyone who wants to contest the correctness of that claim has to foot the bill themselves. It's those fundamental things where I say there's the DNA, and there are far too many people who are involved in this who don't realize going forward that you cannot compromise with democracy in that way. You cannot tweak it, as one person who's a member of parliament said about 2 years ago. You have to either stand up for it, and as a famous person called Curran said, John Philpott Curran said, the condition on which God has given liberty to man is eternal vigilance, and we have failed to be vigilant on those matters. That's what I think is the number one concern now.
Well, that's certainly a full answer. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry to be so long, but it's a major fundamental factor in our society. You know something? The flower of democracy going down through the history, chronicle history of humanity or mankind, is a very brief one. We're lucky to have it, and we need to defend it.
Okay, on to Dr. Michael Reid. Your question?
Good evening, Mr. Peters, and thank you for being available this evening. And thanks for your comments on Q&A about the parlous state of our mainstream legacy media. But my question is, to what extent is New Zealand First a Conservative party?
You know something? A person, a famous politician in the UK, way back in the 1800s, made this comment, which has resounded down through history in conservatism as a factor. But he was talking about a thing called responsible conservatism. Not reactionary behaviour, but responsible conservatism. He said, social legislation will gain and retain for the Conservative Party the everlasting affection of the working people. He was right about that, and they still have a lot of people who will vote for a Conservative Party that's got a social conscience. It's got, how shall I say it, a sense of humanity and concern for everybody in society, where people are treated with the fundamental democratic rights, but people are given the opportunity to go as far with effort and sacrifice as they possibly can. That's the kind of Conservative Party that my party belongs to, and that we have sought to establish. Remember, a famous man made this statement in 1968. His name was Alexander Dubček. It was the Prague Spring. He said, socialism must regain its human face, and so must conservatism, in my view, and in my party's view.
Yeah, I'd
Okay,
like to think of conservatism as preserving that which is good.
Well, you'd think so, you know. The fact is, why the conservatism is such a great resounding theory is that it's conserving, as you say, the best, whilst adapting to the new and the modernisation. Yeah. But nevertheless, there are fundamental principles which are as old as the hill, so to speak. I don't know what you think, but if you read the Old Testament, and dare I say it, Shakespeare, you just about realise that nothing in humanity has changed in terms of their capacity to do good and their capacity to do evil.
Okay, now you're really warming up, Bruce. Right, Dr. Sri Trotter, it's your question.
Good evening, Mr. Peters. It was recently reported that New Zealand First voted on a policy to remove all references cabinet.
Okay, we got that's
Treaty is deep embedded. Now you can't hear me.
Yeah, sorry, Sheree, you cut out a little bit then. Do you just want to start again? We'll see if we can get it right this time, and if you can't, I'll read your question.
All right, thank you. It was recently reported that New Zealand First voted on a policy to remove almost all references to the Treaty of Waitangi from our laws. The Cabinet Manual states that the Treaty of Waitangi is regarded as a founding document of the government in New Zealand. The treaty is deeply embedded in our history, our culture, and our legislation. It was a solemn agreement made in good faith between two parties, and there is general recognition that the government later breached the provisions of Article 2 of the treaty. My question, therefore, is how could the removal of references to the Treaty of Waitangi not undermine the very basis upon which our government is founded, given that there are 2,500 treaty claims and at least 36 principal acts and statutes with references to the treaty or treaty principles? Wouldn't it be impracticable to remove them? Most New Zealanders care about fairness. How would your proposal not cause further injustice?
The occasion you refer to is the New Zealand First 2023 Party Convention, where that was a remit from the floor which was voted for. But it was voting for these facts. not the Treaty of Waitangi as itself, but those who are certain that the Treaty of Waitangi contains all of these principles when they do not. It's a 3-article treaty. It's ceding sovereignty, first of all. The second thing is it is guaranteeing rights. If there should be alienation, there would be a process. And the third thing was that we would be equal subjects in the British Crown arrangement. Now, the word subjects is very significant because subjects does not sound, does it, like a partnership? And we've had a fiction being taught in our universities where they start with a lie that before the European arrived, we were a peaceful heaven or paradise. That is a fiction. And then having gone to there, they claim that we, on the 6th of February, when no one in the whole British Empire upon which the sun never set, or Scotland, Ireland, or the UK, or Wales, no one was in partnership with Queen Victoria, but the Maori were the day after the treaty was signed. Then they argue that we never ceded. Then they argue we never ceded sovereignty, which clearly we did. And the last thing they say, this is the premise of co-government. So you start with a giant lie, and you proceed there, and you're on the way to writing a script which has led to all those claims, and the Treaty of Waitangi Tribunal becoming an industry of its own creation now. I want to show you a book. This man wrote this book 101 years ago. He had a Master of Arts, he had a Doctor in Literature, and he got a law degree in 2 years flat. His name is Sapana Ngata. That's what happened at Waitangi. He was closer to the event. He had colleagues like Sir Peter Buck and Maui Pomeroy, famous members of Parliament with him, and a man called Carroll, a former Deputy Prime Minister, way back in the Seddon government. They agree with what he says, and you got a new group who start with a lie, and the rest is history. And if I was to ask you, would you please tell me what these principles of the Treaty of Waitangi are? I'll be sitting here with fascination, not just as to what you might answer, but trying to find people in the university who all agree with you, because they've written about 80 principles now, none of which stand. And what a great way what a greater way would there be to create a diversion where you do not deal with the fundamental things that Maori want, and yet you go down the sideshow of preferred elitist policies for which the ordinary Maori has never made a demand and will get nothing. That's been my personal experience as a young lawyer when I was in the biggest land case in this country, defending Maori and European against the then Labour government in 1974, and it's never changed.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. I acknowledge much of what you're saying and the problematic aspects, but the treaty principles have been spelt out by the government in 1989. They spelt out those 5 treaty principles as being kāwanatanga, rangatiratanga, equality, reasonable cooperation, principle of redress. And so I guess my point is that there is this...
No, stop there. They might have spelled them out in 1989, but it's no more sounder than tomorrow's schools, which was a disaster that led to the collapse of our country's educational standards. Just because they set it out under a Labour government in 1989, having never campaigned on them in 1987, remember that? And 2 years later, now they're rewriting the script themselves. I'm going to say Geoffrey Palmer was there, and he had said at the time that New Zealand, when he was at university, he wrote a thesis saying New Zealand should never have a constitution of this type. And it should also stay with the Privy Council because we were too small of a democracy and there would be too much proximity to judges and ordinary people in the street. He was right about that when he wrote that thesis at university, but he went back on it when he went into politics. Does that sound familiar to you?
So you think that your proposals are fair and uphold justice for Māori?
Well, Siopana Ngata, who got a law degree in 2 years flat, a record for any student in this country, a law degree that is, he thought so. So did Carroll, so did Pomar, and so did Buck, and so did every chief at Waitangi on the day and thereafter. And all of a sudden we get this new phraseology which says, in a contempt for the Maori leadership of the time, they didn't know what they were doing. Oh, yes, they did. And Ngata says so. And they had asked, in the decades before the 6th of February 1840 for the British to intervene in the interests of peace in this country. That's the historic fact.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Peters.
Okay, let's move on. Dr. Ate Moala, your question.
Malolele, Mr. Peters. New Zealand has got one of the worst abortion law in the world. Why did your party vote against every supplementary order for the abortion bill when it was going to go through anyway? You could have lessened its extremity by voting for the SOPs to support parental notification, fetal pain provision, conscientious objection, and ban on late-term abortion and disability abortion. And do you agree with Christopher Luxon that the law is settled and it won't be touched over the next 3 years?
Well, look, thank you for your question, but I'm happy to answer for myself and New Zealand First and my colleagues. First of all, it's been our long-held view of New Zealand First that referendum should be much more widely used. I've watched in Parliament a long career while temporary empowered politicians, here today and gone tomorrow, by their conscience, tell you that that is the nation's conscience. Just like, for example, at the last referendum we had on legislation of marijuana, or recreational marijuana, or weed, or whatever you might call it. They thought that, and I'm certain that they were going to vote for it, but when it got pushed to referendum, the people said no. And on this issue, our policy has always been that we do not trust politicians or think that they've got any more superiority in their narrow brevity in politics and their background to exercise their conscience when it should be put to the people of New Zealand. And that's why we voted for that and voted against it at the end. Because to suggest otherwise, you suggest a compromise on the principle of asking the masters of democracy, and in this case, it is the people of New Zealand. Now, I can't argue for Christopher Luxon. He's got his own party, and if I was to try and say so, it would be without merit because I'm hardly neutral about other political parties' views.
Thank you. When just during the pandemic,
You want to know what
the
my view
abortion
is?
law,
If you want to know what my view is on circumstances of rape and other things, and it's really a great alarm that you have a society where so much is going on, it should be safe, it should be legal, and it should be rare. I'm not going to tell someone who's being raped they should not have an abortion. And in circumstances, I can see the exception. But if we were in a society with the right motivation, it would be rare, not what it is now.
Although you said
But
you
Mr.
said that it should be legal and rare, although you voted against decriminalising it, didn't you?
Well, most certainly.
So that means it shouldn't be legal.
Well, when I say that decriminalising, what I meant in the way that they were seeking to massively expand it right into the 9th month, as you know.
Yeah.
Those are the differences.
But the thing is that
you've got absolutes. In a case of rape, that person should bear the child. I got a lot of difficulty having in a society where we have been granted free will and you had no chance to exercise it, that you should have that consequence pushed upon you.
Okay, but an amendment was put up to stop late-term abortions to 9 months, but New Zealand First voted against it. Also voted against fetal pain provision, also voted against parental notification.
No, I've got colleagues here. I've got one colleague sitting right through there. I can tell you what happened. It was not what our party did. It was a decision made by one member. And we remember it with great clarity. That person has left this party now.
Okay, so could you go back to Ate's second part of the question, and that is it off the table for you in the next 3 years, or would you be willing to put up an amendment that would make the abortion laws less severe?
Look, in politics, as you know, is described as the art of the possible. You would have to know the views of a majority of Parliament. That's 50 plus 1% of Parliament, even wanting to proceed down that track. You would have to know you've got a chance, no matter what legislation you bring, and not this legislation, or any legislation, you'd have to know that it had a merit of possibility of being successful.
Okay. Ate, I think you were about
Mr.
to start your
Peters,
next question, so we'll come back to that in a second. That's just down the track.
Just regarding the abortion,
Sure.
you may be aware, Mr. Peters, that the majority of the abortions in New Zealand is on demand. It's not from raping. I hope you know that.
Look, I understand that. I understand it. It's in it. It's the number. It tells me that the very reason why there may have been exceptions has now become sadly the rule. And what sort of society, socially and psychologically, have we got when that is the case? And is Keystone being predicated as women's rights? When we live in a society in terms of citizenship, where we've all got fundamental obligations to each other, regardless of gender.
Okay. Winston, many social conservatives who voted for New Zealand First in 2017 were shocked and dismayed when you chose to go with Labour. What do you say to social conservatives that think they would like to vote for New Zealand First this election, but they're concerned that the same thing is going to happen?
Well, you know that I've ruled out the Labour Party in 2023, and I ruled them out a long time ago. And virtually within a month of leaving Parliament, I discovered that a critical piece of work that I was in charge of, because I was handling the United Nations as the Foreign Minister, namely Hey Pua, that we had commissioned as a response to what John Key signed up to report to them. Had the report had been completed and never shown to me, and it never became public until a month after the election. We had a circumstance where Jack Tame tried to make an issue of that the other morning, ignorant as he is, knowing full well that Willie Jackson said that we kept it from Winston. Guess what he'd have done if he'd have seen it? He knew full well, he's my evidence, that I would have stopped it in its tracks. But my real point is that I then said, when I discovered that and other things they were doing, that I would never go with this crowd, this body of people in the inner sanctum of Labour again. And I made that comment very clear to our Audrey Young in a big, huge article in the Herald a long, long time ago. The second thing is I was at a meeting the other day, and this businessman came over to me, and I thought, I know you, and I know you won't be able to help yourself. And he comes over at the very end of the evening, and he couches down and gives me a drilling about letting everybody down in 2017. And I asked him this: did you give me any money in 2017? No. Did you vote for me in 2017? No. Well, are you a communist then? Well, you're a fascist. We demand things that are done whether you voted for the person or not. Because I live in a democracy, and my responsibility is to the people who voted for me. Now, when the first meeting I had with Bill English, and I know he's since denied it, they say, but it depends on the way the question was put to him, because he runs the risk. He doesn't know that there's a record of that or not. One of these days, he will have to be inside the confessional and own up to the seer. He took me aside before we went to the room to talk to National, because they had the most votes. And he said these words: she says she's got the numbers, but she hasn't. Now, that exactitude and directness of those words had me put on red alert at the very beginning. In short, he's telling me that you may have heard that Judith Collins intends to take over, but she hasn't got the numbers. But he put it in the way I said it. And Bill English can deny it if he's denying it to the media as long as he likes. He runs a very serious risk that there is evidence of that if it comes to push comes to shove. I'm not wanting to make anything of this, because I was on the Dominion Council 1976 with his mother of the National Party. But back to my point. Having said that, and then watch the way they conducted their negotiations, they were for some modified status quo. Crime was in a crisis. Health system was in a crisis. A whole lot of things were in a crisis. Housing was in a crisis in 2017. And they never genuinely seemed to want to negotiate properly. They offered us, he won't deny that, will he? 7 ministers. We only ended up with 4 the other side. They offered us 7. We said, no, it's not that we want. We want there to be policy change in this country. And my caucus unanimously voted for that change. And then, of course, how many? 455,000 national voters went and voted for the Labour Party in 2020, and they're all blaming Winston Peters.
Okay, so what do you say to social conservatives that would really like to vote for you, but they find it hard to forgive you for giving us the last 6 years? Well, okay, the last 3 years between 2017 and 2020.
Well, I'll go and read the book of John. Read it again if you're social conservatives, right?
You want us to forgive you. You want us to forgive you.
No, I'm not asking for anybody's forgiveness. I'm asking people to understand the fact. The facts are that the National Party had done all these things. Sign up to UNDRIP, set up the Auckland Super City with race-based provisions, set up the Marine and Coastal Areas thing, all of which I opposed. And now standing in front of me and everybody says, forget that, it doesn't matter. Well, it does to me. I want one country, one flag, one people, where everything's the same. And I do not compromise on the issue of apartheid or separatism, because it'll be the massive destruction of this country. I've seen Burma, most successful economy in Asia. I've seen what happened recently in Sri Lanka, and I also saw what happened to Venezuela, the most successful economy in South America. Governments matter, and principles matter more.
Okay, Christine, your question is next, although your first question may have been answered, but I'll leave that to your decision.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, Winston. Really good to have you here tonight. You have talked a little bit about this tonight, but I'd really like you to expand on it. How will you approach racial division? You've been one of the only leaders that's acknowledged that it is an issue in New Zealand at the moment. And do you have the will to drive a binding referendum on co-governance, and would it be a bottom line for you?
On the second question, the binding referendum is another party's idea, but it's put in this way, that we'll have a referendum in 2026, that's the ACT Party's view, on the Treaty of Waitangi principles. Right there, they don't know what they're doing. They are not the principles they talk about. And certainly not the ones you'll hear at the Sociology Department of Auckland University, of Victoria University, and all over the country. It is a absolute mess of varied ideas and different ideas, all asserting that they're right and some may not have it right. And so I'm not for that at all. This matter has got to be sorted out with voters going into the 2023 election with their eyes wide open. You cannot compromise on these matters. And so I'm not for that referendum. I'm saying the 2023 election is the people's referendum. And that's why I do not want to see people that we will possibly go with after this election thinking they can compromise their way out of this. There's no compromise. And I'm saying it because there's no better way to divert from the things that ordinary people need, and Maori in particular: affordable housing, health, proper systems of escalators of education for their children, first world wages. That's what everybody wants, including Maori. And that's the last thing they're getting in the name of the elite Maori demanding all these work changes in our country. It's the basis I want to get back to. And have I got the will to do it? Well, do you know anybody else that has stood up against everything and everybody, like the wine box inquiry, when I was attacked by everybody, and all businessmen as well, or the Quality Ends deal, or the Maori Loans Affair, and possibly 25 other significant issues, including getting rid of 4 leaders and heads of the Serious Fraud Office and the head of the Inland Revenue Department. If you know anybody else has taken it on and done it because it's right more than me, well, vote for them. But I've got the will, and I've got that, and the tank's not run out by a long shot.
Thank you, Winston.
Okay, well done. We're going to start a new round, but I just did have 2 comments that came through. Susie said, please let him talk and not make it a bulldog interview. I don't know if that relates to Sunday and Saturday morning, Winston. And Sunny Side Up says, it is nice, did that come through? It is nice when the interviewee isn't interrupted every 5 seconds. So there we go. Right, okay, Bruce, your question.
Well, can I say, look, I think it's very reasonable. This is really a blessing compared with what I had on The Nation on Saturday and Q&A on Sunday. I had 2 people thought they were going to have it take me out. And the moment I determined, when I realised that the 4th issues they told me I was on for were never going to be dealt with, I thought, I got news for you guys, and it's all bad. Sorry about you had to watch that, but that's the way it is. This is a very pleasant surprise.
Okay, team, we need to toughen up our questions. Bruce, your question.
We hear in the media the word crisis turns up frequently, not always with the kind of accuracy we might like. Even tonight we've heard it turn up a bit. I suspect that the education in New Zealand is in crisis. And if it is, what do you think its nature is, and what would you like to do about it? Presuming it is in some kind of difficulty.
Well, it's not presuming, it is a fact. Our reading and literature is the worst of the English-speaking people. We've gone from the very front to this colossal loss of status. When it comes to mathematics and these things, and we're at number 32, number 33, and we're sliding. We were in the best in the world once. We were a country, of course, that in 1877, with a whole lot of parliamentarians who were never members of universities, decided compulsory education was essential if we were going to be the country that they, in their vision, wanted it to be one day. And they were right then. So here we go. We've got this collapse with tomorrow's schools that began in 1989 and all the tinkering ever since. And the evidence is shouting at their faces that going off the basics and the fundamentals, the 3 R's, to use a historic phrase, reading, writing, and arithmetic, is what we've got to get back to. And then just to make sure we can't get back there, and I've been attacked by all sorts of journalists for saying that's not true, you know what you're talking about. They are not teaching, they're not educating, they're indoctrinating now. And when I made the comment about you teaching sexuality and all sorts of gender trends and views at schools, they denied that. The journalists did. In my meetings, and I've had countless meetings all around this country. And then yesterday, Mr. Hipkins puts this paper out and says this, and it's historic, talking about going forward on what's happening now. Schools would be encouraged to adopt the Ministry of Education's sexuality education guidelines, while teachers would be given professional development on understanding sexual orientation, gender diversity, and variations of sex characteristics. There is the utter rebuttal to the media's denial of what I've been saying in this campaign. We're going back and making it very clear. We're going back to education, not indoctrination. We believe that these matters, the state has no business in the nation's bedrooms and living let live, but we're not going to compromise our education on the fundamentals while these experimentalists, the cost of our educational standards and the cost of parental right to have their say, prevail in this country. We need to stop that.
Thank you.
Okay, you actually answered two questions, because you answered my one about relationships and sexuality education as well. So excellent. Dr. Michael Reid, your question.
Mr. Peters, as a country, are we too captive to UN, the World Health Organization, and other multilateralist organizations? And if so, how can we untangle New Zealand from overseas interference in our jurisdiction?
Remember a man called Winston Churchill said, better jaw than war. And he was right. And the UN did have a great purpose. And the UN came out of the League of Nations, but the UN, the League of Nations itself, had a serious impetus from a man called Gordon Coates, a person that became Prime Minister in 1925. And the League of Nations was his precursor. And he was a very great leader, but just got caught with the Great Depression in 1928. My point is, membership of the UN was designed for a purpose, but like most things, it's its membership and its quality of its membership that makes it or potentially contaminates it. And the answer to your question is that, yes, there is a global thrust by certain bodies, like the World Economic Forum, which had its past in the Club of Rome, all designed back then at the Club of Rome 30 years ago to say the world's growth has got to be stopped and population must be stopped as well, population growth, so to speak. And here comes the World Economic Forum making pronouncements over top of the right of sovereign nations with democracies to make their decisions themselves. The World Health Organization did it recently, when they set out a new set of rules, so to speak, on how they might make judgments. And the first political party, not even in Parliament, set out that we were utterly opposed to that because it was an infringement of our country's sovereignty. And when the UN makes those decisions, they should be treated likewise. And that's where we stand. You're quite right. There's always been this nagging intent that is quite strong, was quite strong 30 years ago, for a new global world order. And they had their intent to minimize the democracy and sovereignty of the nation state.
Thank you.
All right, we are going swimmingly well, and Winston, your executive assistant, has agreed with my proposal that we keep you a little bit longer till closer to 9, so that's lovely of him, and hope you agree.
Did he ask
You can blame...
Did he ask for permission? Did you conspire behind my back like so many people do?
No, him and I made an executive decision, so you just got to stay there. Cherie, your question.
Thank you. Mr. Peters, in 2017, when you were Foreign Minister, the US passed a resolution to recognise West Jerusalem as Israel's capital, formalising that which had been recognised informally for decades. You, as Foreign Minister, stood against this by voting for a UN resolution that declared the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, quote, null and void. Since then, we've seen the highly successful Abraham Accords, by which Israel has normalised relations with several Arab states. We've seen a number of nations establish embassies in Jerusalem. 96 countries have embassies in Israel, including all our Western democratic allies, and yet New Zealand does not have an embassy in Israel, not in Tel Aviv, nor in Jerusalem. New Zealand voted in 1947 for the partition plan to establish Israel in her ancestral homeland, and theoretically she's been an ally since that time. If you are in government, would you support the establishment of an embassy in Israel?
Look, could you go to the beginning of your question? You said that I did something in 2017. I was not the foreign minister in 2017. I got that job at the end of the election, not during that period you're talking about. And nor was I responsible for the ruling of 2334, signed up by John Key, even though he had a Jewish background, and Murray McCully, which was to make a decision what was anti-Israel and not, in my view, a fair and balanced decision. The first thing you'll see on the cabinet paper of the incoming 2017 to 2020 government at the end of that year, the first item you'll see is our intending as a new government to resile from the commitments that John Key and Murray McCully had made with respect to Resolution 2334. New Zealand first demanded that as part of our coalition negotiations. That, to use a Latin phrase, is our bona fides. Now,
so would you,
on the question that you're asking, we have our embassy for many countries in the Middle East in Ankara, Turkey, and we've had it there for a long time. You raise an interesting suggestion, but I can say at this point in time, when Foreign Affairs was in such an abysmal mess when I took over in 2017, we'd lost 100 frontline diplomats. Our foreign aid had descended to the lowest in the OECD, heading to 0.21% of our GDP, the lowest in the OECD. And there were vacuums all over the Pacific developing that we are still paying the consequences for now. So if you would ask me that, I would say I would want to look at the cost structure, not trying to duck the issue. I'm someone that was in a class learning classical Hebrew in 1967. And I went to class one day and no one's there. They're all off for the 6-day war. They never made it, of course, because the war was over in 6 days. But because of my 3 secondary schools, I went up north and no language training, no classical language training. Needed to get a classical language part of my degree. And so I did classical Hebrew. I'm not against the Jewish people or Israel. And in fact, if you go and if you ask some people, you'll see that it was a tree that was planted there in honor of the stand I've made in defense of that country. That's my good faith on this matter.
There's a large group of New Zealanders who would like to see an embassy in Israel. There's been a petition asking for an embassy in Israel rather than in Turkey for our allies. So you're not committing to do that. is what I'm hearing
I'm
you
not-
say.
I'm asking you, I've been around a long time. When have one of you come to me and said, Peters, this might be a good idea?
I
Not
met
one.
with you in 2017, Mr. Peters, in your office in Whangarei over some of your statements about what was happening in Israel at the time.
Are you saying I made critical statements about it?
Well, you weren't willing to call out the terrorism against Israel at that time. And
I don't
And
think
you
I,
said
I,
that-
don't, I, with the greatest respect, I think there's something wrong with your memory. I have been doing that
no.
all my career. Well, you show me the documentation. You show me the petition you brought to me saying we want to move the embassy. Because this is news to
No,
me.
no. I'm not saying I brought you a petition, no, but I am saying I have come to meet with you to talk about Israel. But there is a petition that has been put to the government asking for an embassy, and there is a large body of conservatives who would love to see an embassy in Israel.
Okay, well, it sounds like we've opened up some dialogue. Yeah.
I'm not trying to be difficult. If that is the case, what have they personally intended to do about it? Well, this is
Well,
part
there
of
is a
their wish list.
petition out.
Is that part of their wish list? Is that a commitment they're going to make right here and right now, with their eyes wide open to do something about it? Because frankly, I've been down to the synagogues here. I've seen it over the years, and I've seen
Well, there is a
also the lack of resolution by that community in New Zealand to get the outcome they want. It's not a criticism. It's someone, as I said, who studied the classic Hebrew of my language, and the Old Testament was my textbook. I have a particularly, I believe, acute view of what I'm talking about. But my point is, what are they doing about it?
Well, they're doing a number of things, Mr. Peters, and one of them is pursuing trade relationships with Israel. In fact, Simon Bridges is leading a trade delegation to Israel next month, I believe. So there are actually a lot of things happening, pushing. But as you know, the Jewish community is very tiny in this country.
All right, Deborah, I'm asking this question. How many members of parliament, like I was, were on the New Zealand Jewish parliamentary group? Do you know many?
Well, there were a few. Alfred, of course, started
Alfred
that
Nara,
group.
Alfred was one, yes, but how many others?
Yeah.
Maybe 5.
My question, though, is about the embassy. I'm not questioning your support for the Jewish people. I'm just simply asking about whether you would support an embassy in Israel.
Can I tell you, we need more knowledge than that. Look, even when Moses was promised by God the promised land, he did not misbelieve him. He trusted him. But have a good look. He sent spies over to check it out. And you need to do far more work, and I think the Jewish community needs to do far more work in this country to justify the outcome they're talking about. I don't want to talk about this much more on this thing. Remember that. Moses sent spies over to check it out. He never saw the land, of course, but he did. Want to make sure that he trusted and verified, even in that circumstance.
Okay, well, we've opened up a communication line, so hopefully that will continue. Let's move on. Ate, your question.
Mr. Peters, in 2021, you said this image here, and my question is, do you still stand by the statement that the unvaccinated were holding Kiwis and the economy to ransom? And what is your attitude to the mandates? Were they appropriate? And do you support a full independent review of how COVID and the mandate was handled by the government?
Look, I've gone public to say that there were some posts that I had that I was not responsible for, and when I saw them, I made sure that at 9:30 every morning that I was there with the team, no matter where I was in the country with that team, so that in the future the mistakes wouldn't be made. I'm not naming who did it, and I regret that there, and I've gone public and said so, because by that time myself I had seen, even in late 2020, that there were statements being made inside the cabinet, of which I was a member, which could not be verified, could not be scientific. They didn't have the time to be able to assure people of that, and that they were beginning to deny the very fundamentals of science, is that you have to keep on trying to perfect it. And when I heard the podium of truth and things like that, there was one big row in cabinet where the Prime Minister had said with Bloomfield that COVID had come from Americold, a freezing company in Melbourne, Australia. And an hour later, I was in another program talking to the Australian media, didn't know what they had said, and they put it to me, and I said, that's got to be absolute nonsense. And they want to know why, and I said, well, they've got 1,200 workers. 2 have got it, by my understanding, and 1,198 haven't. So that could not be possible. And of course, there was a dumbing down by the Prime Minister and Bloomfield arguing it was until the head of Americold Australia said, hang on a minute, we haven't exported any product to you for 4.5 months. Now, the media never explained who was right and who was wrong then, but that became a common experience there when Labor took all the credit and made so many mistakes. And by 2021, I thought this was unbelievably bad. And those statements that you were talking about, I regret. But as soon as I did discover, I made it very, very clear and began a view in the way, can I just explain to you? I studied a man called Roosevelt, who in the Great Depression in the United States said, look, we may not always get it right, but we'll keep on trying. That humility was not in our cabinet in the context where people argued they knew the science, whether they had the qualifications or not. And it went all the way, sadly, to Bloomfield, who's the person that I do respect, excepting he got it wrong. And in the end, all these inquiries happening internationally in democracies beginning to show who should be gaslit and who was down a rabbit hole, but it certainly wasn't those who were having suspicions and who had, the worst of all, they had the right to disagree or the right to say no taken away from them, where at the time it ended with the Prime Minister saying there would be 2 standards of citizenship. You remember Jacinda Ardern saying that? And I knew that we were in the pits as far as I was concerned, but only as obsequious, compliant media in this country would have allowed that to happen as well. So we want a full-scale inquiry with terms of reference that you can trust, and the present people sitting on that inquiry cannot be trusted because they've accepted a confined set of terms of reference, which mean they do not intend to find all the truth and report to New Zealand. So they need to go, and we need to have it in 1 year flat with international experts as well, so that above all, we can trust their recommendations and have confidence to go forward on them. And second, and the most important perhaps, is that we might learn better from this inquiry how to handle such a crisis in the future.
It seemed quite arrogant that none of the MPs came out of the parliament to stand with the thousands of people. And I'm aware that maybe towards the end you came out and, to be with the people. Could you have come a little earlier?
Well, it's right for you to say. Let me tell you why. I'm working flat out trying to keep a business going and keep a political party going. And it's expensive, and I'm not going to need taxpayer money doing this. Just in case you've forgotten. I love the way that people say that, but I was watching one day and I'm looking about day 8 to day 9, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't believe what I just heard, that they had all signed a pact not to talk to them. And someone had called them scum. A cabinet minister had called them scum, or words to that effect. And that night I said to my colleague, Derek Ball, who set up this arrangement here tonight, I said, we're going to get on a plane, we're going to go and see him, I don't care what happens, but this is so wrong. And you remember who got pilloried when he went down there? The media's attention. They thought they could demand to know, what on earth are you doing here, sort of thing. And what I said to them was, why don't you, to use Princess Anne's famous statement, why don't you naff off? I'm not here to talk to you, I'm here to talk to them. And I'm pleased I did. I really am pleased I went, because it was, we had 2 airfares and all the expense. Doesn't really matter. But when you've, got some serious costs trying to keep a political party going, it was a serious consideration. But I'm pleased I went. And I cannot understand how our democracy across the political divide, so to speak, could get every parliamentarian agreeing not to talk to them because Jacinda Ardern said so. I'll never understand that.
Winston, your bestie David Seymour and ACT say that they want to broaden the criteria for the euthanasia law. Now, I know that you've argued that you've supported the euthanasia law only on the basis that it went to a public referendum, which it did, and it got passed. But the question is, would you allow the law to be liberalised further in any way, or do you actually think it needs to be tightened, that it's a bit loose?
Well, I always knew that there was enormous potential for it to be less than adequate, insufficient surveillance to see that there wasn't, what's the word? It's parental manipulation, asset manipulation on the basis of parent abuse, so to speak. All this is a possibility. My only involvement was that I hate to see members of parliament deciding issues like that should be put to the people, so to speak. And on the question of liberalisation, I'll have to talk to my colleagues about that. But my personal view is most certainly not. I would want to ensure that it was much more tightly administered, in the sense that we could have, within the confines of the law that's been written, confidence that those are the parameters, and they're not being exceeded, if I've been clear.
Okay, Christine.
Winston, you'll probably understand why I want to ask this question, but do you believe in beneficiaries who are able to work being sanctioned if they don't make a real effort? And if you do, how would your system work?
Well, unfortunately, Christine, the moment we got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, we've had to do a thing called work. And as a consequence, it includes all of us, and it's part of being a citizen in this country. And our policy, which you announced just the other day, is to have a 2-year cap of a lifetime of that benefit, a working lifetime, that is. And if you exceed over the lifetime those 2 years, our job as a government is to find you a job, and your job is to go to work. But you will not be at home on a benefit when you can work. We've got 99,000 young people, mainly, who are said to be work ready. So if they're work ready, why aren't they working? This is how confusing our domestic policy has become on these issues. And the problem with that is we need them all out there, all contributing in a society, not just for their own good, but because it is the responsibility of a citizen to contribute to a country. I mean, a famous guy called Oliver Wendell Holmes, famous jurist in the United States, said a long, long time ago that the price of citizenship is actually paying taxes. The price of civilization is paying taxes as well. And we need to ensure that everybody's working who can work. If you've got a genuine injury, fair enough. General need is what we want.
I agree.
But,
I agree.
that's got to be the premise. But our policy is the most strictest you see, a 2-year cap over a lifetime.
Okay, we're just about out of time, and I think we've got time for one more question. And so I've made an executive decision because I know that a lot of viewers will be interested in Ate's question. Ate, could you just put your final question to Mr. Peters? Oh, you need to turn your mic on, Ate.
Sorry, Mr. Peters, do you think that churches should be taxed?
Do I think churches should be taxed or not? Is that your question?
Yes, please.
Churches that are genuinely engaged in service to their people and that are genuine charities should not be taxed, no. It depends on their genuineness. And what's the line? I mean, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, unto God's what is God's. And this is a separation. Nor the state should not be interfering with each other. And the state in particular not interfering with a genuine charity. No, they should not be. And I'm not here to ingratiate myself with you, but nor should Family First be, when that is its charitable purpose.
Okay, well, you just answered my final question, Winston, so we're going to let you off early. So, look, we really want to thank you so much for your time on behalf of the panel. Really appreciate you taking time out during a busy campaign season, and we wish you all the best. So thank you very much.
Well, look, again, thank you, everybody. I hope that I didn't speak too long or was focused on the questions you were asking. But I do appreciate the chance to talk to you and your membership and those people who have got influence. These are seriously critical issues which have come, how shall I put it, in the present political environment. They love to try and dispose of people who talk like this conversation and say we're being nostalgic or we're being old-fashioned. No, we're not. This is as relevant as it always will be, and hopefully more relevant going into the future, because it's about the Judeo-Christian heritage of this country, and that's why we've got a democracy. That's why we should be standing up for it. And 28,000 men mainly, not some women, but 28,000 men gave their lives for it in 2 wars. And we want people to go into this election with their eyes wide open as to what they might lose. And compromise, to think you might tweak an outcome, is not the answer. So thanks for the chance to talk to you, and good luck to your organisation.
Okay, thanks very much, Winston. All the best for the campaign.